We spend a lot of time training and developing leaders and lots of money too. But all of that time, effort, and money, we don't seem to get the great return for all of that, at least not at the societal or organizational level. Individual leaders, yes. Individual leaders like you, perhaps. But societally, organizationally, not so much. What if we thought about the problem differently and thought about it more about the team than just about the leader? That's the question we're exploring today on another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead with more effect and to make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, you could have been joining us for it live, or more accurately, for future episodes live. And if you think you'd like to do that and join in the conversation and get this information sooner, you can learn more by going to our LinkedIn or Facebook groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. And when you do that, you'll know when we're going to be live, so you can choose to join us. Today's episode is brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Team, Designing a Team for Everyone's Success. You can learn more by going to longdistanceteambook.com. At longdistanceteambook.com, you can get an excerpt, learn more, find out how to get your copy, and all of those things. Hope you'll do that. And now I'm going to bring in today's guests. And here they are. My guests today are Kyle Buckett and Chris Mefford. Let me introduce them both to you, and then we'll dive in. Chris is a seasoned, award-winning business executive with over 20 years of experience in leadership and marketing. He has been a vice president of the Dave Ramsey organization and co-founded and runs Culture Force, consulting firm that promotes intense coaching and training programs to help companies grow and evolve their cultures. Kyle Buckett is a retired U.S. Navy SEAL and led the advanced training for both junior and seasoned Navy SEALs. He has scaled numerous companies and has been instrumental in business development of numerous Navy SEAL founded businesses. He runs Culture Force with Chris and is also regularly involved in multiple charities supporting veterans from special forces communities. Together, they've written a new book, Leadership is Overrated: How the Navy SEALs and Successful Businesses Create Self-Leading Teams That Win. Welcome, guys. Glad to have you here.
Thanks.
Glad to be here, Kevin. Thank you.
Hey, no feedback now, Chris? We're all good?
Yeah, we're good. Thanks.
All right. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you're both here to talk about this book. And I think we should start here with, like, how did you come to get to work together? Like, what led to this? Your backgrounds are different, and yet here you are. What led you to come together to do this work?
Well, I'll start. Kyle and I met a while ago, and we were having breakfast and lunches at a little place in San Diego called Kensington Cafe. And we would hang out there, and I would probe him about all kinds of questions about the Navy SEALs and their culture, and not typical questions like, hey, what was surf training like? What was Hell Week like? But hey, you guys are considered some of the best. Like, how do you maintain that? How do you recruit that? How do you keep that level of intensity up year over year, decade after decade? And, Kyle would ask me questions. You worked in a successful business. It's been voted best place to work numerous times, over 8 times. What is it that you guys do that's unique? And we realized there was a lot of overlap. But we also saw some things that the business world does that could be useful to the SEALs, and some of the things that SEALs could do that would be useful to the business world. And as we got into it, we realized, and as we got into reading and writing, or rather writing the book, we realized that the problem wasn't necessarily up here where everything was excellent. It was down here that everything was broken. And we keep pushing out the same books and the same conferences and the same speakers, and they keep doing the same thing. And yet, year over year, survey after survey, 85% of the people surveyed hate their boss. And so we think, something's wrong, something's broken. So we started having conversations around that. And that's sort of how we got to this point where we're at today.
So, Kyle, I want to ask you something, because yes, and Chris, I love this idea. What can businesses learn from the SEALs and vice versa? And yet there are way more people watching or listening to this who are in the business world than in the Navy SEAL world or the military world. So, Kyle, I think anytime I get the chance to talk with folks who have the kinds of experiences that you have, I like to ask
Mm.
about what do you see the translation? Like, what are
I
the
love this
things
question.
perhaps that maybe we as non-military folks wouldn't recognize as the translation?
Mm.
We don't have that experience that you have. So, like, maybe what's one or two things that you think are more the same, or that are really important for us to understand from your experience to bring back to ours in the business world?
Oh, I love this question, Kevin. Thanks for asking it, because everyone, a lot of, not everyone, but most look at the Navy SEALs and think of us because of what's up on the movies, what's in TV shows, right? And they think of us as we run around and we're shooting bad guys and we're blowing stuff up, and that's all we do. And
What?
obviously,
That's not what you do? Well,
no,
this
no,
interview is
no,
over. Like,
It's what Kyle
seriously?
does.
no. And that is what we do, but it's not all we do. It's not all we do, right? We also run the enterprise. And what I mean by that is we are in charge, we are understanding and owning our entire infrastructure development, or scaling our infrastructure development. We just scaled and moved the SEAL teams in San Diego from Coronado down to Imperial Beach. That's a $1.6 billion military construction project. Who do you think's running that? Who do you think's overseeing that? Who do you think's designing that? It's us. We run our training pipeline, right? Who do you think overwatches? Who do you think oversees that? Who do you think aligns the assets, the resources, and the manpower and the budgets to ensure that training, high risk training, remind everyone, is done in a safe manner? That's us. There's no like green fairy running around doing all of this for us. It's the Navy SEAL community that does it. And so, from every single level, from the lowest level to the guy on the top, at the top of the totem pole, on every mission, one thing that I think translates very well, and Chris, I was just talking to a group about this yesterday. You and I haven't even had a chance to kind of digest this, is every guy on a mission understands the full spectrum of the assets and the resources and their capabilities, right? Like, how often do we sit down with a team, with a company, and we go, "Hey, you have this HRIS," and everyone moans and groans and says, "Oh, I don't. Oh, I gotta go sign on to Lattice or Workday or Monday and communicate with my manager through this platform, and I don't understand why I got to use this platform or this resource or this asset, or don't understand its full capabilities." Well, what's very unique about the SEAL teams is the junior man, the lowest level, understands the assets and resources and the full capabilities that those bring to bear. So there's a lot of translatable, talent, obviously, but there's a lot of translatable capabilities that translate from service to corporate America. There really is.
I appreciate that, Kyle. So, Chris, you said we figured out that not everything, it's not that everything is great, but a lot of stuff is broken. And you guys talk early in the book about not just, eventually, we're going to talk about healthy or high performing cultures, but maybe we should talk to start a little bit about unhealthy cultures. Like, since you guys have been doing this work in your company and with your clients, like, what are you seeing as some of the most unhealthy things, or some of the common, maybe perhaps unhealthy things in cultures?
Sure, I'll take that. I mean, there are a lot of unhealthy things that happen in culture, and I think the biggest one is just a lack of appreciation that people feel from their leaders. And we think to ourselves, lack of appreciation. Come on, I tell people that thank you on a project, or I say hi to them during the day, or whatever it might be. And the reality is, that's the number one thing people are looking for in your team. Boston Consulting did a survey of over 200,000 workers across the globe, and they ranked what is the thing you're lacking the most and that you wish you had more of from your leader. And number 8 was pay. Number 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. and then you get to pay. But I think most leaders feel like their team just wants more money, or most leaders feel like their team should just be grateful they have a job where they have money. But the reality is, it takes very little to turn this whole thing around. The number one thing, appreciation. That was it. Just tell your team you appreciate them. You appreciate their input. You appreciate their work. You appreciate the loyalty. You appreciate how hard they come in and grind out every day. But when you don't do that on a regular basis, it demoralizes your team. And when your team gets demoralized, your team has a lack of engagement. And when your team has a lack of engagement, they only work at 30-40% of their highest level, which means every day you're paying for about 30% of their effort and 70% is being wasted. And so that's the cost by you being a jerk as a boss, or not being appreciative, or not thanking your team. And it's that simple. But nobody gets it, and nobody wants to hear that. They want to believe that they are, but the reality is that they're not. And the statistics and surveys year after year after year show us differently.
Yeah, and it's not just saying thank you every once in a while, but it's doing that consistently, and people believing that you believe it, right? And it being consistent and it being authentic, and we could go right on down that path. In the book, this is not a test, I promise you, but in the book on page 43, you say something. I'm going to tell you what you said, so that one of you can comment about it, because it's one of the things that struck me. And maybe it's in part because, Kyle, of your perspective in the book, maybe that's where the phrase comes from, but I'd like for either of you to take this on. The phrase you wrote is culture reinforces mission. So culture isn't just something fluffy, right? Culture reinforces mission. What do you mean by this? Either one of you want to take this, and let's unpack this a little bit.
I'm gonna let Kyle take it, but I'm gonna throw this out real quick because it's a pet peeve of mine. How many companies and organizations feel like because they offered you a gym membership or put a ping pong table in the lunchroom that they have great culture? And I know that seems silly, and I see you laughing, but I saw a picture of the rankings of the best places to work in San Diego, which is a company I'm working with right now, just one. And I was going down, you had to send in a picture, and they sent in a picture of a couple of the team members playing ping pong. And so many believe that's what it takes to create a great culture. Kyle knows differently, so I'm gonna let him answer that.
No, it's again, well said, Chris. Creating culture goes deeper than offering a repetitive system of, like Chris was saying, of carrots and sticks, right? It's about creating something worth belonging to, something in our instance, you just might die for, or in corporate America, you're willing to sacrifice for. And so you don't need to take a team of the world's best fighters and turn them into, PR ambassadors like we talk about in the book, but you can still make a dramatic shift in your organization. And so, for the culture reinforcing the mission, right? It goes into where we're going, how you define it, how you support the team, and that's repetitive, right? How are we supporting each other? How are we encouraging each other? How are we motivating each other? Chris and I often talk about, do you have a culture? Do you have a culture that feeds into the top 10 motivators? Or is it a culture that only really feeds into one motivation, and you're only drawing people and magnetizing people that are motivated by one thing? Well, it's a big world out there, right? And we're all unique individuals. We're all motivated by different things. And if you're only able to pull from a pool that's motivating, one out of the top 10 different types of motivations for individuals, you're denying yourself 90% of the great talent that exists in the marketplace. Right. So that culture can really reinforce the mission in a sense of making sure that everyone is aligned. Everyone is aligned on the purpose of the overall organization.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. So, in the book is really framed around three big ideas around culture that we have to, what you call the three phases of culture. So, define, develop, and sustain. So, I'd like you to talk about those things. One of the reasons I love the book is because you talk about some of the same things that we talk about in the book that I mentioned
Right.
earlier, the long distance team book, because that book is largely about culture, as is this book. And so I'd like for you guys to unpack those three pieces: define, develop, and sustain, just a little bit. I don't want
Sure.
to spend too long there,
Sure. Sure.
though, because I really want to get into something very specific in a couple minutes.
Okay.
But give us the outline of the
The
three pieces.
I appreciate, Kevin. You've pulled on something that a lot of people, even though it's in our outline of our book, you'd be surprised at how often people will kind of miss those big phases or parts of the book. And we broke our book down into three parts, which is, hey, you have a culture, whether you want to agree or not, right? You have a culture. Is it what you want, or do you want to refine it and redefine the culture? And it's about getting buy-in from your team, right? So in the first phases, we teach, how do you bring the team together, whether it's one or two individuals, or it's 100. How do you do that to define the desired culture that you wish to achieve? Okay. And so we walk through, how do you do that? And then the second piece is, okay, how do we build the culture that we just defined? We just defined what we wanted. Now let's go out and let's develop it. Let's start putting the tools in place. Let's start putting the resources in place, the assets in place, the finances, the budget. Like, how do we actually develop? How do we start creating those rituals to develop and build the desired culture that we're wishing to achieve? And then lastly, we focus on, okay, now you've done it. Now you're starting to get to the point where you need to sustain and scale. Okay. How do you sustain, improve, and scale a culture that you just developed, that you just built, and your team's growing? Right. This is very important. This is crucial. This is crucial to well-oiled machines, to well-ran organizations, to continually sustain that culture as you add new personnel. One thing Chris and I like to say around Culture Force and the companies that we work with, and it's a mantra of ours for the HR teams around there, around the world that we work with, is we hire for culture improvement. You hear constantly all over the world, you hear these HR leaders talking about hire for culture fit, hire for culture fit. We don't do that. We hire for culture improvement. And so in the sustainment phase of our book, we talk about, how do we do that? How do we sustain this? How do we grow it? How do we try and achieve a constant trajectory of improvement within our organizations?
So I was going to come back to that later, but I think the way you unpacked it is useful, Kyle. So let's do it right now. So Chris, in terms of that, what are some things that we should be thinking about if we're looking to add to our team and we're looking to hire? When you say hire for culture improvement, what do you mean?
Well, I think there's a couple things that we refer to is when someone leaves my team, I'm not looking to replace that person. I'm not looking to find someone better than the person was in that role. I'm looking to replace and find someone who's better than the best person on my team. And so I think a lot of leaders are insecure and they want to take the credit, and they're insecure hiring people who are sometimes way smarter than them, way more talented than them, because they're afraid that, someone's going to realize it and they'll get promoted and left behind, which is really just a lie. You found him, you let him, it's your team, you're being successful. I think the best thing you can do is empower them. I always call it the leadership paradox. The more you give away appreciation and recognition to your team, the more you get back. And so when you hold on to it and you tell everybody it was me that did it, and and that's part of the problem today, Kevin, is we elevate leaders into this hero status, like they're the savior of everything. When the reality is it's teams. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day and I said, hey, name one Navy SEAL. Unless you're really connected to the SEAL organization, you probably would have a tough time telling me one Navy SEAL. But
I
you could
can
probably
right
name
now.
Navy SEAL. Okay,
I'm
good.
looking at it, but
You could probably name
your
SEAL
point is
Team
right.
6. You could probably name SEAL Team 3, and they focus on the team. And when you focus on the team, you can achieve greater things. And as a leader, if you see yourself as part of the team, you're going to go further and faster, and that's going to improve your culture and everyone's attitude and how they look at themselves and how they look at their work, versus elevating yourself above the team and letting others do the same. That's going to hinder your culture. And so when we talk about culture, again, we're not talking about just creating a great place to work, which is important. You want people to feel energized when they come in and have fun and enjoy the work they've been given and the people they're working with. But you also, like, that culture relates to revenue. The culture relates to your finances. And when you have people who feel comfortable and excited and engaged, that raises the revenue for the entire company, and whether you're selling services or products or whatever it might be. And so that's why this is so important. It's not because we want people to only want people to enjoy their jobs, because I think we've talked to a lot of leaders who are like, so what? I have to make this a big fun place. What am I supposed to put a jungle gym in the lunchroom? And I think they don't get it. By building and improving that culture, it ties directly to the revenues and bottom lines of the company and the organization, because people feel more excited about coming to the office. They feel more engaged with what's happening at the company. They feel like people are willing to take care of them and appreciate them. And so they work harder.
And they work willingly, right? They work willingly. So, to me, the thing that I think is the most powerful in the book, from my perspective, is where I sort of hinted at in the open. And we've now talked about, hey, define the culture that you want, but you all have a very specific idea about what part of that culture ought to be. And that is that teams ought to be self-led. And how do we create self-led teams? But before we can talk about becoming a self-led team, which is the title of one of the chapters, I need you to tell us what you mean by that. I mean, Chris, you've been pointing us in that direction with what you were just saying, right? But when you talk about a team being self-led, what does that really mean?
Well, I'll take this and let Kyle give you the military perspective, but they're very, very similar. People, we spend so much time, Kevin, bringing people onto the team. Meaning, we check their resumes. We make sure that they line up with, where they went to school or what work experience they have or who they know or what they've done. And we exhaust ourselves going over that resume. Then we bring them in and we do a series of interviews. HR might talk to them, you might talk to them, the leader might talk to them, the team might talk to them, on and on and on. So we spend weeks and if not months looking at them to bring the right person on. And the minute they get in the door, we say, okay, we don't trust you to give you the credit card to the company. We don't trust you to make a decision about which color the Excel spreadsheet should be. We don't trust you, and it's this idea
Well, you're new.
that
We can't
we
trust
take
you. You're
away,
new.
yes, we take away empowerment from these individuals. We hire them and then we disempower them. And so becoming self-led really is empowering your team to make decisions. So I think the mistake a lot of leaders make is they'll say, I gave them the responsibility of this project and they didn't shine. I gave my team the responsibility to do this and they couldn't get it done. I gave Kyle this chance to show what he had and he had to bring me back in. But what the leader is confusing with empowerment is they give them all the responsibility and none of the authority, or a limited amount of authority to actually make the decision. Now, I'm not saying, set your team free and have them do whatever you want and there's no oversight or thing. Because I also say, hey, being a self-led team doesn't mean you're a dictator. You don't become king all of a sudden and it's still team, a self-led team, not self-led individual or project. So you have to empower them. And I feel like what we do is we give them the responsibility for the project, but then we say, you don't have the authority to make this decision or make that decision, or I'm too busy to meet with you and discuss it so that we can make decisions. And so that disempowerment creates this disengagement, which leads to, so how do you make a self-led team? One is trust. So you have to get in and build relationships with them. You have to get in and build trust. You have to get in and show them how it's done. And then you have to be willing to say, I think this person is going to figure this out. They're going to do it 80% of the way I've showed them, but then 20% of that is going to be individualistic because they're their own unique person. And I have to trust them to do that. And I think what happened with most leaders, the way they pull it back and say, you have to do it 100% of the way I would do it, or it's just a waste of time and I might as well do it myself. And that creates disengagement and disenfranchisement and frustration on your team. So empowering your team means you have to give up some control, and that's hard. Empowering your team means that you have to trust, and that's hard. To which I said, you hired them. Why don't you trust them? You put them on your team. If you don't trust them, get rid of them. I mean, it's that simple. You're the problem and the solution to this whole thing. And so, creating self-led teams, it comes around relationships, it comes around trust, it comes around empowering them, and then it comes finally through giving them the authority to solve the problem. Now, like if you don't trust them to solve this big problem, give them something small until they've earned your trust. But you can't just keep your thumb on them and control them, because that doesn't create a self-led team. And here's the thing, Kevin, when you create teams that are self-led, you create very, very powerful teams and organizations that can achieve things you never thought possible. And I've seen it time and time again. A small group of empowered teams can transform entire organizations. All we have to do is believe in them and let them have their shot. I'm gonna let Kyle know, but you obviously probably read the introduction where we talk about Waterston's, the bookstore out of England, who empowered those frontline workers. Bookstores they were going down. No one was going to him. Waterston hires this guy. He says, we're going to stop building relationships with all these publishing houses where they sell sponsorships, and that in return, we put their books in the front of the store, even if they're bad. And so he started reaching out to all the franchise owners of the bookstores all over England. And he said, what would you guys do? Do it. How would you run the store and sell more books? Do it. And lo and behold, the entire franchise turned around from top to bottom. He just empowered them. He said, look, I can't be in your store. I have to empower you, essentially making them self-led. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reconnect. We're going to talk about these ideas, and you're going to tell me what's happening and what's good. Because it can't be worse than what's happening right now. We're on the demise. And you know who noticed? Barnes & Noble noticed, and they hired him away to be their CEO next. So when you empower teams and you give them the authority and you get out of their way and let them kind of do their thing, you'll see amazing results. I like to go first because when Kyle tells stories like this, it's like we changed the culture of the entire nation of Afghanistan.
No,
that was
I don't
all
see
we
it.
did, Chris.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, Kevin, real quick, just a side note, is Chris's audio a little off to you?
It's okay. It's okay.
For me, one thing that we talk about in the book is killing the leader. It's one of our first chapters. And what became very apparent to me from an early age of being in the military, which I thought was fascinating, a very interesting leadership dichotomy, if you will, is the fact that the entire military focuses on this concept of training the next guy or gal along the way, right? On the job training. And you don't see that very commonly in corporate America. What I mean by that is, if I'm a tactical lead, an officer in command, an officer in charge of a troop or a platoon and a SEAL team, while I'm getting my troop ready for deployment, I'm simultaneously doing one other thing. And that is, I am also training the next guy to take over for me or elevate. So, 2-3 years from now, when he's in the role, he is set up for success, right? He's set up to go out and be better than I ever was. And we actually do this in training where, I'll walk up as a training instructor. If we're in the middle of a training exercise, I would walk over to, a platoon leader or a SEAL chief, one of the guys that's in charge of the mission. And I would go and we would simulate a death. We would go, Hey, John, you just got shot. You have to play dead. Let's see how the team reacts now that you're dead. Right. And so it does a couple of things that's very interesting. It does 3 things that are very interesting. First and foremost, someone has to step into John's role. So that individual gets to step up, and we get to see how good John has been training that said individual, right? Simultaneously, the entire organization gets to watch how he is doing in that. So there's a lot of peer pressure, right? You can imagine, later on at night when you crack a beer or something.
That up, right?
Yeah. Right. Or simultaneously. And what's most important is that John now gets to see, hey, how good of a job have I been doing raising this person up, elevating this person, empowering this person, entrusting them, training them to step into a leadership role should, crap hit the fan, right? And that's an incredible exercise that we often forget in corporate America today is when you elevate, when you empower, when you entrust those that you've been entrusted to lead and you elevate them, you can go out then once they start taking more and more responsibility. Guess what you get to do? And we're so scared of this. We're so scared of this in corporate America, right? Because we don't want them to take our job.
Yeah.
But if you do that, guess what you can go do? Now you can go focus on the next ridgeline, the next product, the next service, the next offering, the next innovative thing. But yet, time and time again, we just don't want to do it because we're scared. We're terrified that we will put ourselves in a place of irrelevance. And
We've been talking with Chris Mefford and Kyle Buckett, authors of the brand new book, Leadership is Overrated. And if you can see it, you can see that they've crossed the word leadership out. So while we've been talking about leadership, we've been talking about leadership today in different sorts of ways. And I hope that you've all found that useful. But before we go, I've got a couple of other questions that I'm going to ask the two of you, only one of which you know. Not that one yet. First of all, so Kyle, what do you do for fun?
I am a big surfer, surfing the ocean. I love surfing.
You can't do that in Austin, Texas.
You can do it in Waco. We got a surf pool up in Waco, Texas, about 70 minutes north of me, as well as another one that's actually coming to Austin here in the near future, which I'm pretty excited about. But no, Mexico's a quick hour, 45-minute flight from Austin, which is pretty fantastic. San Diego, I'll actually be out there with Chris this weekend in San Diego, so I'll get my surf in.
There you go.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you do for fun? You are muted. You are still muted, Chris. And you are still muted, Chris. Kyle, why don't you tell us what Chris does for fun while Chris figures that out?
Chris, I'm going to get to make fun of you while you're trying to unmute yourself.
All right.
There we go.
I was trying to be polite and go on mute while Kyle was talking, and it always doesn't work out for me. Thank you, though. Hey, so I live in San Diego, and it's beautiful. So sun and beach are pretty great out here. I like to go watch Kyle surf when he's in town. And I play some tennis and just kind of do things like that. But I think hiking and hitting the beach fairly regularly, and also hitting the tennis courts keeps me sharp, keeps my mind open, and keeps me fit. So I like doing those kinds of things.
And while you're unmuted, Chris, I'm going to stay with you now. Tell us, this is a question I always ask, and that is, I'll ask you both, like, what are you reading? What are you reading now? What have you read recently? And Chris, no, you can't say leadership is overrated. You've already read it. So what else are you reading?
So, I just saw Oppenheimer, and I thought it was a fantastic movie, from everything straight down to the music, to the acting, to the story itself, which was fascinating. So I picked up a copy of Chris Wallace's Countdown 1945, and it's essentially a book about when Truman comes into office just after FDR dies, and Truman gets in office, and it's basically picks up right there until the dropping of the atomic bomb. And sort of, it's fascinating because it talks about, the decision-making process, the transition, all the people involved. And, it's been fascinating to see, how everyone not just came together for this decision, but how the decisions were made and what processes were used, and then ultimately what it all led to. So that's what I'm reading. I got hung up on the Oppenheimer hype, and Kyle, I think you're reading the Barbie book right now, isn't that right? You were talking about
that was easy. That was easy. Kyle, what are you reading?
I'm reading By All Means Available, which is a memoir of a life in intelligence and special operations and strategy by the Honorable Mike Vickers. Mike Vickers was spent a life, in the Cold War, as well as, dealing with Al-Qaeda. Most famously was kind of recognized in the movie Charlie Wilson's War. I don't know if you remember that movie, but he's the guy playing chess against three people when the spy, the case officer, introduces him to Tom Hanks's character, Charlie Wilson. That's Mike Vickers. I had the pleasure of working alongside of Mike on our unconventional warfare strategy back in 2010 through 2013 in Afghanistan. And Chris and I actually talk about it in our book. So it's pretty fun to go back and read, Mike's memoirs and his earlier career as well, from his viewpoint, aside from the military. So again, that's by all means available by Mike Vickers. And simultaneously, I'm also for entertainment, I'm reading Remy Adelecki's book, which is Chameleon, a black box thriller. Remy and I served in the SEAL teams, and he is getting some massive accolades around this book. So it's a great, entertaining book. I'm sure it'll be a movie, honestly, soon. So
we will have all of those in the show notes, as we always do, along with how to get a hold of your copy of Leadership is Overrated. But Chris, where can we learn more? Where do you want to point people now that we're wrapping up here? Where do you want to point people? Where can they learn more? Get the book? Anything else? Where do you want to point them?
Yeah, Kevin, first off, great questions today. Kyle and I have done a ton of these interviews and podcasts, and you can always tell when someone's read the book and when they haven't. So thank you very much for your insightful questions and your professionalism. Well done. Just a great time today. Thank you for having us on.
Couldn't agree more.
People can find us at leadershipisoverrated.com. Just go there. It's the name of the book, leadershipisoverrated.com. You can find copies of the book. It's available in 58 countries. It's Walmart, Target, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get books. You can pick it up. You can find out more about Kyle and I services there. And you can even see our picture if you want that also.
Leadershipisoverrated.com, and your company can be found at cultureforce.team.
Actually, if you're getting technical, if you go to leadershipisoverrated.com, that will take you redirect to our website, cultureforce.team.
Force.team, leadershipisoverrated.com. Take your pick, everybody. Now, before we go, I have a question for all of you who are listening or watching. I ask this at the end of every episode. Here it is. 2 questions, 2 words. Now what? What action are you going to take as a result of this? Maybe you need to think differently about culture. Maybe you want to think more about what you do with this idea of culture reinforces mission. Maybe it's an idea that you got from one of the stories that Chris or Kyle shared with us. I don't know what it is that you took. I don't know what notes that you took, either with your pencil or with your keyboard or in your head. But I do know this, that if all you do is say, well, that was interesting, then it will be of limited value. So my hope is that not only we get a copy of this book, but that you will think about what actions you will take as a result directly from the last 35 minutes of our conversation. If you do that, this will have been time well spent. Chris and Kyle, thanks for being here, for your kind words, and for being here and sharing some of your ideas, some of your stories, and some of your insights with all of us. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having us.
And everybody, this is what happens here every single week. So why don't you come back? Why don't you make sure that you subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast and review it if you can, and refer it to others, let others people know to join us, not only for this episode, but for next week's and beyond, because if another week, there'll be another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.